Hello and welcome to another episode of 1000 Actually Fun Books, where we try and find the best of fun books in every genre. Today we're going to review a book in the thriller category, the action, adventure, political, conspiracy genre. The Kremlin Conspiracy by Joel Rosenberg. So this is the first of his books I've ever read. This is a book that is the first in the Marcus Riker series. I want to say there's at least 4, but I could be wrong. I'm not entirely positive how many books are in the series at this point. But this is the first one. And he's written several other series. Anyway, so the plot. So the plot is, it's very Cold War-esque, even though this takes place basically mostly right now, kind of in the modern era right now after the Cold War. So the first half of the series does a whole bunch, or the first half of the book, does a whole bunch of snapshots of time. And it takes place over about like 20 years. You get to know 2 main characters. The first is Marcus Riker, our hero that's throughout the series. He's an American ex-Secret Service, ex-military kind of man who can, shoot a gun well kind of person. And he just kind of gets embroiled in the situation. And then we have Oleg. He is on the Russian side of things. And he kind of isn't a mover and shaker. Instead, he's an observer of what's going on. And finally, you have the bad guy, who is the Russian president. And the story kind of follows, kind of at the beginning, a little bit more Oleg than Marcus. You get a setup for who Marcus is, the major life events. But mostly you're following Oleg at the beginning to see how he becomes the son-in-law to the Russian president and slowly dives deeper into his advisory council and into the circle of conspiracy, so to speak, of figuring out what it is that the president of Russia is trying to do. And clearly he's trying to bring Mother Russia back to her days of glory, and doing it through any means necessary, whether it's military or political, whether it's making treaties or lying about the treaties that he's making, whatever it may take to become, the Tsar of Russia once again. And so Oleg is watching all this happen, and increasingly he becomes dissatisfied with what is happening because he feels not in Russia's best interests. So about halfway through the story, the American side finds out about kind of what's going on and what a threat is going on, and then the rest of the story is how this is resolved. And I won't give you more detail than that. Okay, so the things that I like about this story. The highest thing is the plot. I mean, it's very interesting. It is also very engaging, especially the second half. I mean, once we start getting the action going there, it's like it draws you in. You want to stay and find out what happens. And, it was definitely the kind of thing where you're like, oh my goodness, an hour has passed. How did that happen? As you're reading through, because it draws you in. So yes, there's action throughout the book. Even when we're still setting things up, we have, firefights and bombings and, all sorts of things happening in an action sense. You also have a lot of the political maneuvering, because you get a lot of into the meetings of who is planning on doing what and why and how and where and what's the motivation and how do we think the other side will respond, that political shenanigans, type of stuff. That can be fun to spy on, to see what's going on. So I like all that aspects. I thought it was fun. This book was it was published in 2018, which means it was written at least in 2017, maybe 2016. So I had to double check this, and I had to look at some dates because it refers to things that happened in real history in Russia. So you have invasion of Georgia and no real not the state of Georgia, the country of Georgia, no real international response. And the Russian invasion and taking over of Crimea, and how that happened and when did that happen. So it refers to these events as part of Russia's slowly widening sphere of influence, where they're like, I want to take this back and I want to take this back because it belonged to me. Yes, it tried to be its own country, but really it belongs to me. And the motives there behind it seem really eerily true to life, because we could see that actually happened. Then it starts referencing things that the author clearly can't have known about because it happened afterwards. So the stuff with the war between Russia and Ukraine. Now, the author goes about this differently, but it clearly is happening in here, kind of similar to the way it happened in real life. There are definitely some things in this book that did not happen in real life that it has Russia attempting to do or planning to do or whatever, or doing. But like I said, because it is such recent history that the author incorporated, it feels very realistic. It also, so our bad guy Russian president is not named Putin, but it's a very thin veneer of, plausible deniability. He's named something else, but everything about him screams Putin. From the fact that, all the maneuvers, the invading of other things, other countries, to his personal life. So our fake character, he divorces his wife and doesn't marry. He has an affair with his mistress, who is a gymnast. In real life, Putin divorces his wife and has an affair with, a ballerina, I think. I mean, it's really, really similar. You could just see that the author was, poking at Putin at this. He's the bad guy. And, yeah, so I thought that was kind of fun and funny, but I'm sure Putin was not impressed. Anyway, so if you're a real Russian, patriot, you may not like that aspect. But that's just, anyway, he's a bad guy. The religious aspects, I liked it in this book. So it was not, there's no preaching of any kind of religious things, but our main character, Marcus, is a Christian, and the author approaches this in a very realistic fashion. He's got bullets flying towards him, and he kind of goes, God help. That's his prayer, pretty much. Or, he has marital difficulties and reaches out to a pastor for counseling. I mean, very realistic. And then on the opposite side of the spectrum, our Russian, Oleg, is totally not religious and forced to go through some religious aspects of Eastern Orthodox stuff that he literally says he grit his teeth to go through it. And again, that felt very realistic. So none of it was preachy, but it was, I thought, well done in that respect. Let's see. I think those are the main things that I really liked about this. The plot, the pacing for the second half. But that kind of gives me to the parts that I didn't like, which would be not big things, but some things. So the first half is definitely slower because it covers about, like I said, about 15 years, maybe a little bit more of time. So you get snapshots, the big highlights of people, both Oleg and Marcus, in their lives. And it feels very much like a snapshot. Oh, we have, this one thing happened, and then a couple years later, this one thing happened, and a couple years later, this one thing happened. And the author didn't always do a great job of that. I mean, it kind of felt like, yeah, you could have summarized this whole thing in a paragraph and moved on. We didn't need to have, multiple pages of a whole bunch of these snapshots for some of it. It also made the relationships in the characters flatter. So, for example, Marcus has marital troubles, as I already mentioned. So one scene you have, he tries to set up his family to go on a cruise, to try and get closer to his wife and son and other things. And he sets it all up, and at the last minute, he can't go because of his job, because he's a workaholic. And his wife just has a meltdown and, yells at him, how could you put your job above your family kind of thing. And she slams the bedroom door and he's kind of like, I'm sorry, I've got to go. And so he just writes a note of, apology and leaves. And the next scene we see at this is a year later, and it's just reminiscing, oh, they went to counseling and it's all better now. And she has come to accept his job. And it feels very flat. You don't have that emotional connection. Then a tragedy strikes later, and again, you don't have that emotional connection. You're just kind of like, oh, this person died. Well, that's too bad. It kind of feels like a news report. I mean, you kind of feel bad if somebody dies, but you don't have that emotional, heart-wrenching, oh no, this whole person that I knew is gone, which you can have in other books, but this one did not bring that about. Instead, you're just like, oh, the person died, that's sad, okay, let's move on. And so that's a weakness in this book. You do not come to this book for the characters and the relationships or anything of that respect. The last thing I will just say is it's somewhat predictable. This is a action thriller kind of book, and you can expect there to be car chases and, gun fights and people sneaking around undercover and, just barely escaping by the skin of their teeth. I mean, you could probably read some of the beginning and kind of expect a lot of the beats in the book. That doesn't make it less fun, though. I mean, if you like that kind of book, you would like this kind of book. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. It doesn't need to be full of surprises and unexpected twists and turns to be enjoyable. Okay, so overall, my recommendation is I liked it. It was kind of on the border between okay and highly recommended. I wasn't sure whether to say, oh, it's kind of predictable and there were some things I didn't like, so it's just okay. But my husband is kind of like, you're too picky. So I'm like, okay, well, you know what? I'll bump it up to highly recommended. I'm going to give it a 2 thumbs up and put it in my yes, definitely go read it if you like that kind of book. So yeah, that's my conclusion on that one. So for part 2, what I'm going to read next, I decided to try not my favorite genre, but just literature, just drama. Modern drama, not historical stuff, although I think this might actually be a little bit historical. It says 1944, so maybe this is historical. Anyway, I'm going to try Ann Tyler's Dinner at the Homesick Restaurant. And I don't really know anything about it, except it sounds like it's supposed to be about a family, like a grandma trying to reconnect with her children and grandkids. It also sounds like, from the New York Times review, beautiful, funny, heart-hammering, wise, superb entertainment. So maybe it's supposed to be funny too, that would make it much more enjoyable than something that's depressing. So we'll try that next. And I say thank you again for watching, and I hope you join me next time.